Humans were always an odd species. Their love of overkill is constantly overshadowed by their kindness and generosity. These soft-skinned bipeds always contradicted themselves like that. There was often a saying I'd heard amongst the more philosophical members of the educational institution I attended. When the world ends, it will not be with a cataclysmic bang, but a fearful whimper. This phrase was one I understood instinctually. It was a fact, really. When your planet is dying or slotted for execution, what is there to do but beg for mercy? Then the years came, when humanity showed us the third, heart-breaking way their world could end. Earth, like all homeworlds, was almost entirely devoted to their various cultures and ways of life. A living museum of sorts, where they live like ages long past for the preservation of history. Other than a small planetary garrison and reserve fleet, it was largely undefended. The Carnids took advantage of this. None knew how the Carnid bioship had slipped past the front lines, but it had. It crashed onto the humans' home planet, along the west coast of North America, in a state known as Oregon, per the Historical Index. With the university stationed in the state known as Massachusetts, we were originally told we were safe, that the garrison on the west coast could handle it. Then the reports began coming in from the Ochako front. These Carnids were not the same ones they had fought almost 1,000 years ago. They had been modified to be bigger, stronger, with thicker armor and redundant organ systems. They could reproduce in the middle of combat, sending swarms of screeching young into the trenches without a care in the world. The Ochako front fell within weeks, and the young men and women who gave their lives were heralded as heroes, their sacrifice spurring a global call to arms. There was a young man in my class named Hans Lugner, a small mousy man with thick glasses. He signed up for the war effort immediately after finding out his brother had been killed on the Ochako front. He was sent to a planet in the Alpha Centauri system to help with a refugee evacuation. I remember when I first saw the footage, shot from the tail camera of an evacuation shuttle. How, even with a fist-sized hole in the chest plate of his armor, he still rose against the nigh godlike Chosen to smack them with his broken rifle. He died, then, throat gashed open by the Chosen's war gauntlet. But even as he lay dying, the camera zoomed in on the young man, as he seemed to stare back, with a smile. It was then that I got a slight inkling as to how humanity would fall. The war against the Imperial Union, as they had been calling themselves, showed many battles like this. And even as the Carnids rampaged through Northwest America and into the South, humanity never gave up. Each kilometer and mile was flooded with the blood of humanity's warriors. They who held the line in staunch defiance would break their fists against the hardened carapace of the Carnids before allowing them another inch. But for every warrior who gave their lives, there was a mother hugging her children to her so they didn't have to watch the evacuation outpost be overrun as they flew to safety. Siblings reunited at the last second, thanks to warriors who put their own lives below those that they were there to rescue. Families who remained whole. Friends who didn't have to bury their chosen blood. Each warrior gave their life in exchange for the life of a dozen innocents, or more. For the miles of the battlefield was soaked in the blood of warriors, every drop of innocent blood diluted by the fiery liquid iron that filled a warrior's veins. But the miles of blood-soaked land kept growing, and the warriors were running out. I still remember the day General Krieg Tolman arrived at the university. A reserve man, abrupt and callous he seemed, as he informed us that the Carnids were on their way here, and that Earth had been considered lost, because the Carnids were reproducing and spreading too fast. I remember asking him, Then what are we going to do? I remember the way he looked me in the eyes then, stern but determined. Me and the 501st have 24 hours. If by that time this entire area isn't evacuated, we have failed our mission. I hadn't been able to respond. How could they be concerned about evacuation? This was their history, their home, and they were just going to give it up? Sadly, that is exactly what they were going to do. We were the last living souls on the planet except for wildlife. The sound of gunfire started early in the morning. The many bodies gathered in the main courtyard flinched at the sudden cacophony. General Krieg stood there with us, watching the sky and defending a barricade that guarded the main doors to the courtyard. A man with a large backpack stood next to him, a wire leading to a handheld earpiece and microphone, as he shouted orders and organized defense lines. I could hear the many voices on the other side of the strange earpiece, how they shouted back affirmatives and information, even as the roar of gunfire tried to drown them out. It wasn't long then that we heard the heavy thump of artillery fire and the crackling rumble of explosions. The first shuttle arrived perfectly on time and took half of us civilians away in one trip. I was slotted for the second ship, and I did not mind at all. It was a choice. To allow Hans's mother to go ahead of me in honor of her son's sacrifice, but she had also refused, giving it to one of the youngest students, a Solarian girl with red-rimmed eyes. The battle raged on easily into midday, the amount of voices shouting back on the radio ever lessening. Some even cut out with insectoid shrieks or explosions. I began to notice a change in the man known as General Krieg. There was a franticness with which he checked his watch and shouted orders, looking back at us for moments at a time in silence before shouting something in an old Earth language. Haltet die Stellung! Es sind wir oder sie! It was strange the way he glanced around when he said it, always looking at me or another student for the second half of the shout. I suddenly began to worry, especially as the shuttle hadn't returned yet. Had it been delayed? The sounds of gunfire and screaming men grew closer. Many were cut short by the defiant roar of a death sphere. General Krieg grew even more frantic in his orders, calling in support from the ships up above that never arrived. Hours passed, and a palpable fear began to fall over the courtyard. Was this it? Is this how we would die? I heard the word mutiny over the radio, and General Krieg's shoulders fell. He seemed to break for a moment before looking at those gathered. Then he finally picked up the receiver, looking at his radio man with a nod. The radio man nodded solemnly and retrieved a metal suitcase from the bottom of his pack. Saying a few short words in that old tongue, he turned and faced us as his radio man opened up the suitcase with his thumbprint. Typing in a few codes, a big red button rose from the center of the device as big, blocky letters spelled out "Armed" on its screen. General Krieg took the suitcase from his radio man and slowly marched over to me. I took the suitcase in bewildered surprise. General Krieg looked at me with a stern but trusting look. There was a mutiny aboard the HES Want Some Fuck. They sabotaged the evacuation pods, and even though they quelled the mutiny, the pods are still going to need roughly an hour to be repaired. Krieg snapped a sharp salute as he informed me. This button will launch every nuclear silo on this rock and scorch the Earth. It will kill all the carnets on the planet, but it will also kill the planet. As a soldier, I cannot make that call. I cannot choose to take all of you out with us to take out the carnets. We don't have an hour to wait for the shuttles to be repaired. General Krieg dropped the salute and set a hand on my shoulder, face softening. But if we fight hard enough, you will. So I'm giving you an order, soldier. Once you're on the WSF, you are going to press that button and be a hero. I was shocked, But General Krieg didn't give me time to protest, as he marched over to his radio man and shouted 3 words. "Hold the line!" For a split second, I saw a figure standing next to the human general. A massive red-skinned rallet in worn armor, proudly, if sadly, set their hand on General Krieg's shoulder. I blinked, and they were gone. But the sounds of battle renewed, the gunfire multiplying in intensity as something was heard, even louder than the roar of gunfire and explosions. Heard even over great distances. "Hold the line!" Then louder. "Hold the line!" And then, like the roar of a cornered beast, it rose from all around us. "Hold the line!" Hundreds, if not thousands of voices crying out the same words in unison. The cataclysmic roar of gunfire was a symphony to their song, as General Krieg moved his men into a defensive formation around us. But even as the cry had swelled, it began to fade. Voices and guns fell silent. The sound of chittering and screeching bugs finally reached our ears, as we heard the front of the building crash inward. General Krieg dropped his radio and hung his head for a moment. I held the suitcase in my hands like a leaden weight as I watched him shoulder his M40 carbine and pointed at the doors. Then, I heard that gracious rumble from on high and looked up. General Krieg did the same, a soft, relieved smile on his face as a chuckle burst from his chest. The shuttle alighted on the pad less than a minute later, just as the heavy doors began to pound and shake. General Krieg turned and saluted me, just as the doors burst open and a swarm of carnies flowed towards them. He turned back around, letting out a manic roar of laughter. "Show 'em what you're made of, boys!" The sound of gunfire was deafening in the walled courtyard, as the tide of insectoids was physically pushed back by the hail of lead the human warriors unleashed. Working in 2-man teams, the stream of fire was never-ending. When one ran out, they crouched down, allowing the man behind them to fire while they reloaded. The bodies of the armored bugs piled high as I was finally loaded onto the shuttle next to Hans's mum. The old woman stoically held back tears as the shuttle door closed behind us. I couldn't bring myself to look through the porthole as we lifted off into the sky. In less than 10 minutes, we were on the WSF. An officer brought me to the bridge where the captain was still talking with General Krieg somehow, but in a low, subdued tone. "Is my new recruit there yet, Adams?" The captain looked at me and gestured for me to speak. "I am here, sir." There was a happy chuckle from the man, though it was raspy and quickly devolved into a cough. "Guess these bugs are smarter than we thought. By the time they got to me, they must have realized that we weren't meant to survive. They're tearing the place right up." I was frozen with fear and awe at the man, about to ask for instructions when he answered my unasked question. "Don't even think about asking if I need a shuttle, kid. I got some rebar sticking from my chest right now, and the stars have never been brighter." He trailed off in a chuckle, before smacking his lips and softly sighing. "You have your orders, kid. Be a hero." He sounded excited as he said the words, and then there was a sound of wet crunching and the line died. I looked up at everyone, and they looked back. Then I gazed out at that pale blue marble, darkened by the moon. And with a heavy heart, I pushed the button. Understanding now that humanity's fall would not be with a whimper or a bang, but a bloody smile and the last laugh. General Krieg's soul sat atop the roof of Harvard University, staring at the sky with his men as new stars rose into the sky on trails of smoke. Clinking the brown bottle in his hand against the one in the hand of the being next to him, he sighed happily. "Did we do well, boss?" War gazed up at the falling missiles with pride. "You did more than well. Your father awaits you with open arms and tear-filled eyes." General Krieg nodded contentedly. "Kinda sad to see the old rock go like this," he mused, as the missiles fell ever closer. But then the two chuckled as the first new suns lit up the night. But like her people, she'd rather die than live the life of a slave. The heat and pressure washed over their souls, turning the Carnids and buildings around them to ash, but leaving them untouched. And when the dust had settled, there their father stood, a young man, eyes wet with tears, as he held out a hand. "Come, we have a long journey ahead of us, and we have a lot to catch up on." General Krieg smiled, and let death haul him to his incorporeal feet.